Welcome to Linux Saloon, a place to discuss tech, open source, and where Linux is always on tap. Each show will have a talk about a Linux project, such as a Linux distribution, a desktop environment, or application. We also chat about the news or any variety of topics from the community. Anything that is Linux, tech, and open source related is on the table for discussion. I'm Nate, a Linux fitness and vintage tech enthusiast with an almost unhealthy obsession with the openSUSE project. And with me today, I've got Eris, the Vashinator, Mr. Chocolate, Colin, Mark, Jinda, Bill, Vince, Eric, Adam Grubbs, Gabriel, Azua Mario, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, Sravan, and Caramel Boy. So we got chocolate and caramel. This is the tastiest Linux Saloon I think we've ever had. So welcome all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Excellent.
that was such an enthusiastic. I'm so glad I'm here. It's like it's like
It really was.
it's like it's like your Monday coming back to school. Or Tuesday after like a long weekend. How excited you are to come back to school. So thank you so much for being here. If you haven't done the StrawPoll yet, there is a StrawPoll link in the YouTube chat stream. Asking about your experience with GeckoLinux. So we'd like to get as much participation on that as possible. If you didn't do GeckoLinux, that's okay. You can actually say you didn't do it. That's one of the options. So please do that survey. The more participation, the happier Eris gets. And if I have a happy Eris, we have a happy show. That's how it goes. So coming up, we have a distro exploration. We're going to check what's on the menu for next week. Do a community free pour with the Vashinator. Last call, but first, what have you been doing in Linux? Adam, you have been you've been doing a lot of stuff in Ansible, and I actually had a specific request on more Ansible information like from this show. And so I wanted to hear from you, like, what is number one Ansible? You hear that word, and then for those of us that aren't really keying into it, like, I don't know what it is. And how are you using it to make your life better in tech?
Okay. So Ansible is known as a configuration management, I guess, agent software, whatever you want to call it, platform, however people want to name it. But it handles configuration management, which is a way to create a configurable state for a resource, whether it be a Linux server, Windows server, Linux desktop, network switch, storage array, all kinds of things. There's tons of Ansible modules out there for all kinds of things. But what it is, it's a Python-based tool that allows you to run a set of plays, as it's called, and each of these might correspond to a specific thing you want configured on the machine, whether it be network, like the network interface, you want the packages installed, you want certain configuration files set a certain way, and all of this. And the idea is to create what's called a stateful configuration, where you're not running a script like you normally think of, which just runs a set of steps. This runs to ensure that the machine is at a certain state. So say I want a machine to have, let's say, Steam installed, right? So there would be an Ansible module for apt or yum, or just a package module that can detect which package manager. And you would tell it, I want Steam installed and I want the state to be present. So when I run the playbook, it will do the things in the background to install Steam. But since it's looking for a state that Steam is installed, it will actually ensure that Steam is installed. So if it's already installed, it will say, okay, it's already installed, and it doesn't reinstall it or trip up because it's already installed. So the same thing applies to any kind of other configuration, say like a network configuration, where like you can tie into something like Network Manager and set up static IPs or DNS settings and all that. And it wants to ensure that that is set on that machine rather than just sending it out there regardless, right? Because if it's already set, then it doesn't need to do anything. So the idea is to target a resource and get it to a configured state overall. And that can be however much configuration you want to do, right? So like you can go and write Ansible roles and plays that like build out a whole machine basically. Or if you just want to make sure that all of the machines you're targeting have the right DNS settings, you could just do that too. So the idea is you can do this across one machine, like your local machine, or as many machines as your runner or your machine will handle, the traffic for.
Hmm.
So
So Adam,
go ahead.
sorry, I just real quick on that point. So would you say then, so one of the challenges is you're deploying something and you're trying to make sure that there's a like deployment and you're, deploying several things, and by using a sort of centralized, verified, known good playbook, then that means that I can spin up another one of these using this, and I know I'm going to get exactly the same thing every
Correct.
time.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you can create a reproducible configuration for the resources you're targeting, so that that the setting, because if you do it by hand, you might typo something, you might
Right.
forget a step, or even if you write a script, right? The script doesn't necessarily check for the state of the thing. It just runs whatever commands you told the script to do, right?
Got
So
it.
this is about achieving a state of configuration rather than just shooting commands at it.
So then the play is the what, and then Ansible is the how that happens.
Yeah,
Like it
so Ansible
understands.
would be like the Ansible is like the platform, the series of like Python tools that run, and the playbook is a YAML file that
Mhm.
targets like specific modules in various Ansible collections that will then run against the target machine. And some collections and roles are an extra thing, but that's basically the idea. Is you have like a playbook with a list of things that you want configured on the machine, and then you have an inventory file that has all of the machines that you
Got it.
advantage of it over a lot of others like Salt and Puppet and stuff is it's agentless. So it actually does, in Linux's case, it does everything over SSH. So all you have to do is push your public key to the remote user on the remote resource, and you can configure it that way. You don't have to have an agent running on the machine at all. And the same thing applies for Windows. You can actually use the WinRM interface for configuring Windows machines.
So how then do you? So let's say you set up. Let's say you're going to set up a bunch of Fedora boxes or whatever to do all the same thing or some various things. So you have these playbooks, these scripts of sorts in the Ansible server or manager thing, and then you somehow you SSH into those machines, and the playbook executes, which is a script that does all the customizations for you over the network.
Yeah, correct.
Ansible manager thing. So Vash,
Yeah.
correct me. It's called the Ansible manager thing. That's
Right. Yeah. Something like that. So I will actually post in the Zoom chat.
Okay.
Real quick. So I have a playbook on my GitHub that's public, and this is for setting up a personal desktop, right? So I don't have any of my credentials or anything in there, I don't think. I shouldn't.
Knock on wood.
Right. And so like I have like an Arch role. So if you in there is a folder called roles, and then there's Arch. So this is specifically the Ansible set that I run against an Arch machine, right? And then under tasks, there's a main.yaml, and you can see in that file that there's a series of modules that are being called to do different things. So I can have a module for like block in file is one of them that adds a block of text to the end of a file or wherever you tell it to in a file. So if you want to add, say, like a mirror to in this case, I'm adding a repo to a pacman.conf, then I just have it add that block of text at the end of pacman.conf. And every time I run this, it checks that file and is like, is this text here? Yes, it is. Good. If not, put it there. Right. And then you can have it like create directories. In this case, I have installing Yay. I have it pulling from Git and then running the make package command and all that, just to make sure that like the state of an Arch machine is like fully configured the way I want it.
So I also assume then that there's a lot of auditing and logging to make sure like what happened when and how. And
yeah, it will output to standard out if you by default, but you can have it set. You can set up loggers and stuff to collect the output. Yeah.
So one of the things is not so much the programmatic output, but like one of the things that I always had a challenge with managing, hundreds of machines was someone would change something and there was very little information, like forensically for me to figure out like who did it. I could
Right.
figure out a lot of times like what time something happened and then sort of infer from that, oh,
Correct. That is not
it had to be
necessarily
this person that was working, but other people could, yeah.
yeah, that's not necessarily like an Ansible thing. That's more of a business process thing. That's more of an IT
I just didn't know
process.
if that was part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you can have there's a few ways to go about that. One would be like enable a sort of pipeline thing through like a CI/CD system so that the output is logged, the output is tracked, the person who committed their code to the Git repo that it was built upon, you can see what they changed, when they changed it, who changed it. That would be the main way to handle that problem is you would keep these playbooks in a Git repo, like a GitLab or GitHub or whatever. And then you can see the people who commit and push to the branches and get merge and pull requests. And then when they're pulled, like say you get a merge request from like your branch to main, then you can have main then deploy the changes, like run the playbook against the targets. And so you can always see like, okay, this failed or that failed. Here is why, because here's the change it was made in this commit and all that. But that's not really, that's sort of outside Ansible's thing. That's more of a, how do you build a process around Ansible to solve these problems?
Got it.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you can take like you have it in main.yaml, but I'm guessing you can take and break that out. So like just for example, yeah. But I was just looking at it and you have like, creating a dev folder. And like that would make sense maybe in any Linux distribution that you're going to run. So theoretically, if you wanted to run that in something else, you could have that its own folder or its own file.
Correct. Yeah. So the way I have this built up is there's the concept of roles in Ansible, and roles are a collection of playbooks and other resources for running against a target. So in this case, I have an Arch role. I don't really think I have it built out that much, but like there are specifically named folders that hold specific things in a role. So like a templates folder will hold Jinja templates where it will read the template, it will read the config, but like it has like templating things in it. So like it will then build the text file or the config or whatever based on the template you gave it. So you can programmatically build a config file that way. Or like the vars folder will hold like variables that you can then pass in. So things like that. So in the tasks folder, there's a main.yaml. There's always a main.yaml in there because otherwise it won't run properly. But you can build like say folder structure.yaml or applications.yaml, and then you can include, and when you go into main, you can say include tasks folders.yaml or include tasks application.yaml. So you can kind of break those out and just include them in the main one, and they get run along with it.
So yeah, I may have to look at this for something for my like YouTube PC at something at some point, rather. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, and it's great because it's like, like Erica brought up as well, like it's reproducible. So like you say reinstall your machine, you can get it to a proper state that you are fine with right out of the gate. So in this case, after I install Arch, all I have to do is part of the Arch install allows you to install packages in the installer. So like I just install Git and Ansible. And then when I go here, I just git clone my repo and then run the Ansible playbook and it configures the rest.
Oh, so Ansible has to be installed on the machine that's getting configured as well. So there's some sort of
no,
not
necessarily. I'm running. So since this is run on localhost, like targeting my own machine, I have to run Ansible from my machine to target my machine. But like if I were to run it against say 10, 20 servers, they don't have to have Ansible installed at all. All they have to have is a Python interpreter.
Okay.
And then I would install Ansible, say on my machine or on a specific server that's like a control node or however your architecture is. And then from that machine, you would then push it out to all of the remote machines. But in this case, it is a local host target, so it's targeting itself.
So to what extent can you automate things? Could you in theory automate the actual installation process of the operating system itself? I mean, is that
so Ansible has some modules for that, for like virtualization.
Okay.
So like say vCenter, like VMware stuff. There's a few others. that they have some things with, but mostly like infrastructure like that is usually built with something like Terraform. It's usually a better tool for that.
Okay.
But Ansible is possible.
So an installation to a
Um,
certain level, and then Ansible takes over the rest. So
Right.
then you could do, in theory, like a bare bones installation of an operating system. So like for Arch, the absolute minimum, just enough to give you network and have an SSH server, because I think
And then
SSH is
just
a requirement
use Ansible to build the
to
rest.
build out the rest of it. Okay. That
Well, if you're targeting yourself, you don't actually have to SSH into it. But yeah, like if you wanted to like build other machines, then this is a good way. This is also a
Okay.
good way to kind of replicate what like group policy does on Windows for enterprise machines. So like you have group policy settings for like permissions and all this, and like something like an SCCM server will like dictate that, or a domain controller.
Mhm.
So like with this, you would have like a specific control node or an automation machine that like when you add like a new laptop to your workplace, then like you can have that playbook run against that laptop and configure it the way with permissions and packages and all the stuff that it might need. And you can have like different roles, like this is a business computer, this is a creative computer, this is an IT person's computer, that kind of thing as well.
That's very cool. Now, how did you get started learning Ansible? Because it seems like, as you talk about this sounds like a daunting thing to get into, like learning a programming language. Is it have a pretty steep learning curve, or is it pretty intuitive at this point of pointing and clicking and pulling things together and making little addendums to it?
You're going to be writing a lot of text. There are some products like AWX / Tower, whatever, Ansible Tower is like their paid product. So Ansible is a Red Hat product, by the way. It's like a Red Hat project.
Okay.
So like they have a sort of GUI version called AWX, which is the open source version, and then there's Ansible Tower is their paid version, and then they have if you have a whole lot of money because you're an enterprise, they have the Ansible automation platform, which goes way beyond anything any of us need.
Right.
And yeah, so like you still have to write the playbooks, you still have to understand like what it's doing. It's not at the level of like I just double click this and it runs, right? I mean, you could do that.
No, but
you could build that, but it's
you
not
know,
really meant for that.
I have to be honest, and today I thought it was pretty daunting too. But the key, and Adam, please, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but it felt like the key was really understanding the YAML files and
Yeah.
being able to read them, understand what they're doing, and then, breaking your own problem down or your own situation down into those individual actionable items, like what state do you want the machine to be in, that type of thing. But the YAML is pretty straightforward. It's just plain text.
With
and
special indentation. That's the big thing about YAML.
Yeah.
Indentation matters a lot in YAML. But
yeah, white space is a bad thing.
yeah, it can really mess things up. But as far as like learning it goes, how did I learn it? Well, I just started an engineer role at a school system, and I had many Linux servers that I had to deal with, and we didn't really have a good process for managing them, to be quite honest. And so there was a lot of like I'm SSHing into this and changing that, and like all this bespoke change, and then something would go wrong, and like who did it? I don't know, because nobody wanted to blame anybody, including themselves. And so I was like, you know what, there has to be a better way, right? And so I was looking into ways to automate configurations like this, and I looked at Puppet, and Puppet's like, so when I just did some Google searches about like options, and I came across Chef, Puppet, Salt, and Ansible. And Chef and Puppet were kind of like, I didn't really like their syntax, so I just kind of ignored them. They're okay, like all these tools are fine. And then I was looking at Salt and Ansible, and the reason I went with Ansible was because Salt required an agent to be running on the machine. So I would have to provision a machine with an agent on it that the Salt master would then talk to. And I'm like, that's not really great, because I don't want to like have to manage a fleet of agents now, right? And make sure that they're running and all that. So with Ansible, since everything is run over SSH, and as long as the other machine has a Python interpreter, which basically every Linux machine does, then you can just run it over that way. So all I had to do was copy my public key over there. No big deal. You do that anyway. And then I can run these automations across it. So part of the provisioning process of building a VM was to copy the SSH key over so that whenever the VM was ready, I could just immediately start configuring it.
So when
And
I hear
it was really born out of like a need of like, I can't manage this many servers by hand. Like I need a better way.
right. Yeah, I get it. When I hear chef and puppet, I think of the Swedish chef from the Muppets. So I just kept getting stuck on that as you were talking about
That's
chef
fine,
and
yeah.
puppet. And
Nah,
you know,
these are all like the same kind of tool.
and imagining him like in a server room, and then like pulling out wires and such.
I think
So-
that's exactly how that works.
Yeah,
That's how Ansible, chef, and puppet work together.
it's not far
That's
off. Yeah,
the concept of the chef going into the server room and pulling the cables out is a lot of what I deal with every day.
yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
that's how I learned it. It was mainly out of a necessity, right? Like just as most things are. And the great thing about Ansible is there is an absolute just mountain of documentation out there. There's every bit of documentation out there. There's tons of people's tutorials. There's lots of Stack Overflow posts. There's, you know, server fault posts. There's tons of stuff out there. Ansible is probably the biggest of all of those like configuration management tools. And you can basically just Google search like anything you need, like install AUR packages Ansible, and like it'll be like, hey, here's how you install AUR packages on Ansible. Like it's really just that. Like there's so much information out there. It's that easy to get to it. And so when you learn like the basics of YAML syntax, which is pretty straightforward, you just have to pay attention to quotes, colons, and indentation. And once you learn that and you start to like look at what's available, like in the modules, you start to kind of, the gears start turning in your head. You're like, oh, like I can do this with that. So like, here's how I can fit this into my machine or into these servers or into the whatever, right? And so once you start to be exposed to what's available, then it just kind of snowballs where you're just like, man, look at all this crazy cool stuff I can do. And I can do it to like 100 servers at once.
Adam, I have a question for you. Like when I was exploring something for dot file management, the name Ansible came across, but many people said it's too complex for the stuff you want. There are other simple dot file managers. I went with something called Chemoi or CHEZMOI. So
Okay.
that was an easy method for me to replicate my dot files across several systems, setting up systems very fast because I do some lot of testing. I need to set up systems very fast.
Yeah.
But what's the difference between them?
So in this case, it's limited. Your tool is specifically for dot files.
Yes.
And Ansible can do so much more than just replicate configuration files.
Like
It can install
it's
packages.
just for dot
it can,
files.
Sorry?
I could extend it a little bit, so it can run scripts also with certain like specific conditions, like when you're
Right.
initially running the configuration tool or whenever you're changing that script. So I have scripts which install AUR packages or repo packages at the start of the system with certain prompts. So I say, if you want a full installation, it will install like 100 packages. If I want minimal, it'll install only 20. If I want the AUR packages, I have Y or N. I have stuff like that, which
Right.
but
So-
I wrote the simple scripts.
Yeah, so the difference there is those are just running scripts, whereas as I'd stated before, Ansible is about a configuration state. So that if you want the machine to be at a certain state, it's not just a matter of running the thing to do the thing. It's a matter of checking if that thing already exists or if it needs to be changed or if it has been modified and needs to be brought back to a good known configuration.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a matter of like bringing the machine to a configured state rather than just shooting stuff at it, right? So like something like that might copy your files over and it might, run the package scripts and stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily ensure that that is what actually happened, right? It just runs the command.
Obviously.
And so like in the case of like in Ansible, like if I try to install a package and the package doesn't exist, like it will be like, hey, this package doesn't exist and like fail out, right? Because it knows it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I install a bunch of packages and then make a change to my playbook and like add another package and run it again, it'll be like, okay, the state has changed because it was this previously and now it's this. And then like it will know that the state has changed rather than
So
just
interestingly, what you said is managed by Git for the dot files, So I have a minute, I can control the state of the dot file because it's to Git. So if I make changes on a system, I update the changes, I push to Git, and then when I pull from Git on other systems, it'll automatically apply. So
But
that is there,
it's a
but
matter
that's
of
only for dot
verifying that
files.
though.
Huh?
Does your script verify that though?
Not script. I'm saying for dot file specifically, because it's primarily a dot file manager, but you can do other things. But it verifies that, like, it doesn't verify that the system is in the same state, but it verifies that dot files are in the same state.
Right, and that's I guess that's part of it, right? Like you can run
Yeah.
scripts and other things, but Ansible does so much more than just handle file configs. It will handle network configs. It will handle you can I don't know. There's so many modules out there. There's so much stuff. And it's not just limited to Linux as well. It can be run against Windows servers. It can be run against networking switches. It can be run against storage arrays. It can be run against NAS boxes and all these different things because there's modules and roles and collections for tons of stuff. So like while that's really useful and maybe Ansible is overkill for just handling dot files and a couple things, I think it's better to kind of centralize on that because if you start out using Ansible with like your dot files and other things, then there might be something else you want to configure. And it's like, oh, hey, there's a module for that. There's a role for that. There's something else. And then you start to build like this kind of desired state for a machine beyond just the config files. Maybe you need to configure networking stuff. Maybe you need to configure booting stuff. Maybe like there's tons of things that beyond just a user config or anything like that. Like there's so much more to it. And I use it personally for just configuring my own machine, which is, you know, any one of us could do, right? Like we all do that manually, no problem. But this is just because I'm lazy, right? But it's when it's like, and when you're working with a fleet of servers, the key is to be able to have that across the board. And it goes beyond that because you can have things programmatically set. So when I mentioned the state of the configuration, there's what's known as Ansible facts. So when it runs against a machine, it can return data that you can then use later. So like say, if I install I have a playbook that installs an agent, right? And then it restarts, it makes sure that agent is started, right? So when I install the agent and start the agent, then I can have or I can check the status of the agent, and that will return a result as to whether or not the state of the agent is running or stopped or whatever. And I can have then another step saying like, well, if the state is stopped, make sure it's started. If it's halted or whatever, make sure you restart it, that kind of thing. So it's beyond just like shifting files and installing packages. It's sort of verifying that the actual config is running the way it's supposed to. It gets pretty in depth, not gonna lie, but it's not hard to learn. I don't want it to sound like it's scary or anything.
Well, it sounds like something that you have to like work your way into. What would you say, Vince?
No, it just feels, to me, it feels like one of Adam's over-engineered solutions to home problems that, you know, you don't really need.
Look, man, if I'm going to do it all day long for a career, how's it not going to leak into my home nerd life?
I'm just kidding. I've already forked your repo.
Yeah. Oh, have you? Excellent. Yeah, it's a great tool. Like I've been using it for about 3 years now, I'd say, professionally.
Oh wow.
So like I've learned a lot, and there's still so much I don't know, and not necessarily that I don't have an aptitude. It's just that there's so much out there that like there's still times where I'm like, I need to do this, and I just Google search like, how do I do this Ansible, and it's like, there it is. Like, course there is. Of course there's a role. Of course there's. So have any of you heard of Tailscale, for example?
Oh yeah.
You ever use it? Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I used it a lot.
So there is a role in Ansible that so you think of like GitHub for like code. There's Ansible Galaxy, which is where like people store their collections and roles and stuff from the community. And so there's a role that I use in that repo that Vince just forked that will actually pull Tailscale down, and I provide my authentication key to it in my own config. Just don't push that to Git, guys. Just be sane about it. And I put my key in there, my auth key, and it will actually install Ansible on that machine, or install Tailscale on that machine and authenticate and bring up Tailscale and just add it to my network. Like, that's handy.
Yeah.
Like, that's super great, right? Like, it's something like that is really useful. You know, if you have to build VPN configs for a bunch of machines, there you go, right? Spread it around, make it
Yeah.
easy on yourself. So it goes way beyond even the simplest things, but it's not that hard to get into. It's just you just find a reason to use it is basically, and it snowballs from there.
So if you're gonna tell somebody like, 'cause to me it sounds like a very daunting thing to get into because it seems like there's a lot of moving parts that you have to understand how they all work together. So if you're going to advise somebody on getting started in Ansible, how would you say they go about doing that first? Like on their own computer, like their own desktop or whatever, or in virtual
Yeah.
machines, like pushing into virtual machines? How would you recommend like a step-by-step, this is how you can experiment with Ansible and understand how it works?
I would say the first thing they should do would be to build a playbook that just does something to their own machine, just targets their own machine, because they don't have to worry about SSH keys and all that they may not know about.
Mhm.
They don't have to worry about, you know, the networking and stuff that goes with that. If you just want to just play with some modules and configure some stuff on your machine, that's a great way to do it. If you are into VMs, then spin up a VM that has its own IP, push your SSH key to it, and just push stuff to it and like try out different configs and modules. There's tons of tutorials out there for from the simplest thing to the most complex thing. There's tons of documentation and help out there. Google searches for it are really, really well parsed because like it's such a big community that uses Ansible that someone has an answer, guaranteed. Like there's nobody who doesn't have an answer. It's crazy. So yeah, and I mean, even if it's something as simple, if it seems like, yeah, it's a little over engineered for maybe just installing some packages, right? Because you could just, you know, sudo apt install or whatever. But you start with that. And then when you see it doing its thing, you're like, ah, that was cool. And then you add another thing, and then you see it does that thing. And then you're like, and it just builds from there, right? Just like
Right.
any new thing you learn, right? You start out something small, and then when you start to explore what's available, you start building ideas in your head and like, can I do this? Can I do that? I want to
Mhm.
do this or that. And it just 3 years later, here you are sitting here writing Ansible all day long for a job. So
Yeah, it makes sense.
Would-
Can I offer a resource out there for anybody looking to learn more about Ansible?
Yes, please.
Anybody who's on YouTube should check out Jeff Geerling. He's
Yeah.
a well-known technology YouTuber, and he has created a whole series of Ansible tutorials, and I believe a book as well that you can buy. And I have followed his Ansible tutorials. He's very easy to watch and listen to, informative and helpful. So if you want to get more into Ansible, I would highly suggest subscribing to his channel or looking up his videos.
That's good to know. Thank you. I'm sure
That
Jinda
is-
has a
that is
link for
one
that.
way. I'm not a big person on learning from videos, so I didn't really think about
I
that.
would
but yeah.
I would link the video, but I am driving home right now, as you can probably see. You're all on the journey with me, and therefore I'm not going to attempt to do that.
Yeah, I noticed you're kind of drifting over that white line a little bit. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I totally made that up.
So Adam, is this now become so entrenched that if anyone's interested in any type of like DevOps opportunity, like this is just something that's going to be assumed that you know how to use?
Yeah, this is pretty standard these days, and this would be
Okay.
a very desirable skill if you were to go into a DevOps or platform engineering or something like that. Yeah, it would be. I mean, let's be honest, the Linux sysadmin job doesn't really exist anymore. It is pretty much DevOps now. Like I mean, they do exist, but I'm being hyperbolic, but just to make a point. The point is, learn if you want to do this as a career, you have to learn these tools, like because it's just not manageable to go server by server anymore. It's not manageable to like just have a, you know, like a OneNote notebook of like the things you did, right? Like there's so much more than just Ansible that gets built. There's like pipelines of running playbooks and keeping track of things, keeping track of the code itself, and like version control. There's the idea of, you know, in the enterprise, you might run it against something like a ServiceNow database or a vCenter database where here's all of the hosts. And so you don't have to specifically say these hosts, like you can have a dynamic inventory of which to send it to. And various staging to to dev or staging or production, and it goes beyond that. But this is definitely a tool that anybody getting into Linux professionally now should know. It's that pretty much industry standard.
Got it.
That's good to know. So as far as like you're talking about SSH pre-shared keys, it's not hard to do. In fact, it's so easy. I did write a little article on it, and I put it on. It's on cubiclenate.com. So I thought I'd share that little shameless self plug there. So if you want to check that out. Well, very cool. That's good to know. I keep hearing Ansible. It's like you hear it on like Linux Unplugged, or you hear it on Destination Linux. You'll hear about Ansible, but like you just don't know what it is. I mean, they explain it's an automation tool, but it's nice to hear some things that you've automated and how you've made your life easier as a sysadmin. And there are ways to utilize it for I mean, I guess everyone's a sysadmin that owns a computer that takes care of it, right? So there are ways for those that administer a fewer number of machines that it may be helpful as well. So that's actually, it's very cool. And I wonder like if there's some value in there in like distro maintenance and whatnot, as far as like people who build distributions, if there's a function in there as well.
I mean, there very well could be. I mean, if your build pipeline kind of includes that, but
yeah, I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
That's a little different, I guess. I'm not saying you couldn't use Ansible to do that kind of stuff. I just think it's maybe to like, I don't know, get your machine to like a specific configuration that you can then kind of base off of for a distro.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just throwing out there. And so there was actually go ahead.
I was just going to say, it popped into my head for like software QA testing and stuff like that, needing to have systems at specific states to do certain testing.
Right.
Yeah.
If you need like a specific execution environment, a build environment, this is a great way to do that. If you have specific dependencies that you rely on for a certain application to build or run, this is it, right? Like whether it be libraries, whether it be specific environment variables you can pass in, those kind of things. This would be definitely a very good use for that.
Got it.
Well, very cool.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I had a general sense, and I've looked at it a little bit, but I didn't really quite get, how useful it was.
Yeah, and I've considered like, I don't know, doing a ad hoc stream or something about it one day, but I don't know. It just depends on if people are actually interested or not.
I think if you had a specific thing that you were trying to accomplish, I think the problem that I have with videos about stuff like this is if it's just sort of generalities like, oh, well, it could be used for this.
Right.
But if you were very specifically saying, okay, I need to be able to, manage and configure this, set of machines. And in order for me to do that, I'm going to write this playbook and, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So if there's interest, I can do that one day.
Yeah, it might be interesting to like, I don't know how frequently, but to explore some of these things that are, a little bit beyond just distro testing and application testing, just some areas that we can all learn a little bit. It may be a little bit outside of a lot of our wheelhouses, but, but I think pushing that knowledge envelope just a little bit, outside what is necessarily, our comfort zone, I think is a good thing.
If I can't teach, I can at least inspire.
Right. This is those that can't do, teach. Those that can't teach phys ed, right?
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to definitely talk about that again. So, and some other things too. I think there's some skills that exist in this community, and I'd like to those that are experts. Obviously, Matt, Adam, you are an expert at these things. It'd be nice to like get more of your squeeze some of that knowledge sponge out of you or something like that. That doesn't sound right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, whatever.
I'll go away.
I'll walk away from that one. All right, so I'm going to move on to the distro StrawPoll. If you haven't yet done the distro StrawPoll, I don't know what you're waiting for, but but it's there. You can do that very quickly. But Eris, you did a StrawPoll concerning GeckoLinux, which is our distribution that we've tried out for this week. How did that StrawPoll work out?
Oh, they're voting right now. I got updated results. Okay.
Yeah, I just voted too.
Okay, so in 38% said it is okay, 14% said it is amazing, 14% said not interested in doing this exploration, 14% said I'm unable to do the exploration, 9% said did not have a good time with it, 9% said other, and 5% said not interested in doing the explorations in general. I did get some replies, and they were, let me see. They were, I sort of wish there was an option somewhere between okay and amazing. Something like solid, very good. I certainly think that it's better than okay, but it doesn't blow my socks off either. I installed the Plasma version of Leap, by the way. And then I said, going forward, I'm going to put amazing, good, and okay, and I'm having a good time. Sort of a four level tier system for the distros.
Well,
And
the more tongue in cheek you can make it, the better, I think.
and I got a separate reply, and this is pretty good, but I'm definitely biased. Winking.
Very cool. Well, for me, I'm because it's based on openSUSE. It's basically a respin of openSUSE. So of course, I thought it was amazing. And I'll get into that part of it later. But for me, it was just a little bit of a different evaluation than just a distro. It was kind of more of a desktop environment, I would say, evaluation, I think, for me. All right. So I guess we'll just get into that. So part of the distro exploration rules. The intent is to talk about the different aspects of the operating system or the distribution and discuss the experience from using it. This is a discussion that by which should be objective and constructive, as non-objective opinions like, this is garbage isn't really helpful. Rather, if you say things like, I wish that it had a specific feature, or I really need features that allow me to, fill in the blank, that's benefiting the conversation. The point is to highlight the positives, but not to ignore the lowlights of the project. We have to remember this is a labor of love for some, so let's not poo-poo on it. So a little bit about GeckoLinux.
All right. So GeckoLinux is a set of Linux spins built from the openSUSE distribution with a focus on polish and out-of-the-box usability on the desktop. It's available in static based on openSUSE Leap and rolling based on Tumbleweed. The main features are an installable live DVD USB system based on openSUSE under 2 gigs in size, which, I'll get through these and then we can compare and contrast, but there are some excellent reasons for running GeckoLinux if you want to run openSUSE. That's actually a pretty big one. Individual editions for many different popular desktop environments with a pleasant default configuration. Carefully selected open source desktop programs and proprietary media codecs pre-installed and ready to use. Btrfs subvolume layout with ZSTD transparent compression and automatic snapper snapshots. Bootable via Grub for easy rollbacks. Beautiful open source font rendering configured out of the box. Let's see, installed system can be smoothly upgraded for future releases. And how does it differ? And I think this is really the point of it. I mean, so you mentioned it was a respin, and it's not so much a respin as it is a repackage of particularly the installation options and with some additional configuration. It's almost like Endeavor is to Arch in a lot of ways.
Yep, I think that's a good comparison.
Yeah.
Because Endeavor can go away and then Arch, it would just persist as an Arch installation. So Endeavor is not really a fundamental key piece of what makes the operating system, which is one of the, I don't want to say shortcomings, but one of the encumberments of Antigros, its predecessor, essentially. Yeah, I think that's one of the key differentiations, I think, of GeckoLinux. And if you listen to Linux User Space, Leo and Dan talked about it in depth about how they had a lot of conversations with Sam. Of course, everything's in depth with them, but they did have these conversations with Sam about how if GeckoLinux just disappeared tomorrow, it wouldn't matter because it's just basically it's an on-ramp. It's a specific on-ramp to openSUSE essentially. Like different Arch installations out there as well.
Yeah, these differences, I think this is really the sort of the heart of why would anyone do this? So I'm just going to go through these really quickly, and then we'll jump into
You don't have to read them all.
discussion.
I just threw them all out there. You can pick right through.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. So coming as an offline installable live DVD for static and rolling, whereas openSUSE has a non-live DVD USB installer, a net install image, or Tumbleweed live DVD.
Right.
And the installer itself. So openSUSE's installer is comprehensive and very capable, but also a bit confusing at times, and also pretty slow. Whereas this is a very familiar experience for I think a lot of people.
It uses calamaris.
Yeah, and it also, because you're getting the pre-configured desktops, you just pick what you want, and you don't have to go through like going in and installing a desktop from a standard. Well, I guess the installer kind of gives you that as well. I guess it's almost like openSUSE quick start, like I say, I want the Cinnamon desktop. I want it on Tumbleweed. I grab that ISO. It's pretty small. I spin it up, and just like that, I've got a full Tumbleweed environment with a full desktop. And it's just basically ready to go. And then with some of those other options that I mentioned, baked in.
Yep. Sam is in the YouTube. He says, yep, I call it an alternative configuration and installation method for openSUSE. Once installed, I, as only a maintainer, am completely removed from the picture. That's what it is. I would say one of the things I think is interesting that is done, and I don't believe openSUSE mainline by default has the Z standard transparent compression enabled. So I think that's one thing. I could be wrong, but last I checked, it wasn't enabled by default. I think deduplication is, but not the compression in the Btrfs. So that's enabled. I think there's a couple little configuration tweak differences there as well. And I think also the multimedia codecs are also installed by default. Although that changed again with like the Cisco X264 module or libraries, which are unfortunately incomplete. So they won't do everything, but they'll do a lot, but not everything. So it's good to have all this stuff going as well. Yeah, Sam says correct. So I'm actually right about something. Somebody write that down. Colin, I was right about something. So I'm really excited.
You've got it recorded.
Yeah, I do.
Like Endeavor OS is like much easier than a straight Arch.
Right, exactly.
This is like same way.
Yep, exactly it. All right. Well, some of the ISO options. There's like tons of ISO options, which is very nice. They're nice little packages, you could say. Products to get the version of of GeckoLinux that you would like. So they have under the static release that are based on Leaf. They have Cinnamon, XFCE, GNOME, Plasma, Mate, Budgie, LXQt, and a bare bones, which I think is funny, the image, because it's the image of a lizard skeleton. So I thought that was funny. It was well done. And, thanks for the laugh on that. The lulls, as I would say. And then there's a rolling, which is based on Tumbleweed, that has Cinnamon, XFCE, GNOME, Plasma, all the same, except the addition of Pantheon. So that was the only addition in that grouping. And then for the next edition, and next is the stable openSUSE Elite base combined with the additional OBS repositories to offer the latest version of two popular desktop environments of Plasma and Pantheon. So you can have that static base with an up-to-date Plasma or Pantheon, which I think is important because I don't know about Pantheon, but I know that Plasma does seem to be progressing a lot as of late. And I know there's issues with Tumbleweed and NVIDIA, so that it's kind of a nice balance between full-on rolling and completely static. So that's what the next edition is for. Yeah, if you haven't tried GeckoLinux, you might like it. It's a great way to dip your toes in openSUSE. Another differentiation I think that's important is there does not pre-install package kit, which is known to interfere with the underlying zipper package management system, and that can be to your benefit or to your detriment. I don't know. I think probably it's a positive. Maybe things like Discover won't work. or I should say, Discover won't work with the native packages anyway.
But on the other hand, if you want to like update your system out of the blue, you won't have to wait for PackageKit to finish doing whatever the heck it's doing to your packages at the moment.
Right. And
That's the great benefit of that.
That is the benefit of that. You know, maybe an alternative, is just a thought, I'm just spitballing here, would be have PackageKit installed, but not checking for updates. Because if it's not checking for updates, then it doesn't interfere unless you invoke, I don't know, maybe that's not too complicated. All right, so the setup process. So there's a lot of different options for GeckoLinux, a lot of different ways you can go with that. So I chose Budgie. Did anybody else here try Budgie? It's been in the news a little bit lately and so I just thought I'd try Budgie out and see how it went for me. No? Am I the cheese that stands alone on that one? And that's fine. I know, Eris, did you try GeckoLinux?
No, I didn't get a chance to this time. But
okay.
I did try a lot of them last time. The last time we did them.
Okay.
We did Gecko. And I think if I remember correctly, the bare bones install is like an option in the openSUSE installer also. If I think it says, you know, when it gives you like, you want to install Plasma, you want to install GNOME, and then there's like a bare bones option. I think that's what that is. I installed like, I think Plasma last time and the bare bones. And I forgot what environment they give you. They give you some kind of window manager. I forgot what exactly it is.
Yeah, I think it's just like a window manager. So it's basically it's the absolute minimum viable product, which isn't very pretty, but you know, I guess it gets going.
Just so you can boot and then build whatever you want.
Colin, did you happen to try GeckoLinux?
I did install it. I installed the GNOME version.
Okay.
And
static or rolling?
I noticed rolling actually.
Okay.
But I noticed is that because the ISO is a little bit out of date because it did do a lot of updates.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the frequency is of he basically takes like a snapshot, and it shouldn't matter with Tumbleweed. You can go 6 months, a year without updating, and Zipper will actually push an update through typically without any problems. At least I haven't experienced any problems.
It did ask a few questions during the update, which confused me a bit. I wasn't sure which way to go. I can't remember what those questions were, but I think I just chose defaults, I think, on that.
So how did GNOME work out for you? It was probably a vanilla experience of GNOME?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm not sure what version it is. I haven't really had a look at that, but I can just check that out now. But I think it was pretty much up to date.
So the ISOs for rolling, they're from 820. So that's August 20th, I think.
Yeah, it should be no problem then. I just did an update.
Yeah, there was a lot of updates. It did do a lot. It took quite a while, but that's not a problem. There's no issues with the update at all, so that was all good. I haven't installed any software yet, but I think it did come default with LibreOffice and a few little other things. It's the Yast. I tried to install NVIDIA, but I've got an Optimus, and NVIDIA, I don't know. I think the only ones that really do NVIDIA really well is Ubuntu based. I think Ubuntu have really nailed NVIDIA installation, to be honest, but I just couldn't work out the NVIDIA on this. It says it's installed, but it's not doing anything. So yeah, it's trying to read the documentation on that. I did try installing another type of NVIDIA and it sort of crashed on me. So I don't know what the deal is there. Maybe it wasn't suitable, but it's not a big deal anyway.
I know that Scrap had some NVIDIA joys as of recent on openSUSE. There is on one of their wiki pages, there's like an easy way. We just click it and it goes through the process of installing all the bits. And Sam says, yeah, it's probably about time to update the ISO. Thing is, Tumbleweed frequently updates their GCC and does a complete package rebuild, so the ISO will almost always be out of date.
Yeah, but it functioned all right. It rebooted fine, not a problem. I think you've got snapshots in this thing as well. So I think you can, if you do an update, you can go back to previous, I believe. That's what it had. So on the Grub boot screen, I think there was a selection of going back to optional kernels. So I think it went from a kernel 5 something to 601 or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but
that sounds right.
Yeah.
The issue I found, so I can give you a little update because with what I found out investigating this in last week was there's 2 different driver packages for the NVIDIA graphics on Tumbleweed or in the openSUSE, and in one I found it through the forums. So I took your suggestion and went to the forums, and I found an issue there, and I found a thread. There's the G05 and the G06 driver packages. The G05 packages are for the current drivers. Okay.
Right.
Like the most, and so the G06 are for all the cards. The current, it's got legacy stuff built in. So like if you have a card that's maybe it doesn't work with G05, then go to try the G06. Well, I had some issue, and this is weird. My issue was a little different than what most of the guys were finding, is that most people found that they were running either G05 or, like in my case, I was on G06. There was a Tumbleweed update that happened and a naming convention changed, and it then was not doing the kernel module thing at the end of that update properly somewhere, is what they were saying. So there's something on their end that they've got to fix with that. The solution most people found was to revert back to G05. And that seemed to work for me. Now, in my case, what was funny is I was on G05. I had a goofy update, and then I went and put in G06, and it fixed things. Then I had another update that made things goofy again, and then I went back to G05. And the reason I went to 6 was because I was having issues with Proton games in Steam. Like some of the latest Proton versions, which I think is at 7 now, they weren't working, so I had to go down through them and change the Proton versions per game and figure out which ones worked. And I ended up having to do that all again. So that was the fix and the workaround for now until they figure out their naming conventions and they get it right in the update code. And there you go.
Well, you know, in GeckoLinux defense, this Optimus NVIDIA is always an absolute pain to install anyway. I think I can't remember whether it did ask me to install NVIDIA during installation, because it definitely had the G05 in there. But there was no NVIDIA settings in amongst anything. So I couldn't find the settings. So I decided to manually install the 6. But that crashed on me. It just froze completely, and I had to close it. So I don't know, because I chose to uninstall G05 and install G06. Maybe I should have done them separately instead of both at the same time. Then maybe that's what.
You said you have an Optimus laptop. That's Optimus, yeah. I'm on that same thing. That was my issue. Okay. So right. Yeah. I would suggest install when you do that, go and get the like, what's the package called? Is it Bumblebee? I think. And there's
Bumblebee, yeah.
Prime Select. Have you used that in the terminal to switch between Intel and NVIDIA graphics?
Not on here. I've done it on a few other systems. They don't seem to ever work. I think. How old's yours? Because mine's fairly old.
Mine's is a really 2019 laptop. It's got a GTX 2060.
Mine's probably a 2012. That's why it's problematic. They were very problematic back then. But if I went to software repositories and look at, so there's not that one. What is it? Software management. There's two different types of G05 and 6. One starts with X11, the other one starts with NVIDIA. So that's a bit confusing as well. I think it's the X11 you have to use, yeah, I believe.
Yeah, X11 packages.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead. I'm going to look at something while you're.
But yeah, it's got the tools there definitely. But I think my cards is problematic. I think that's why. So I'm not surprised anyway, to be honest. But if I do install something on this Toshiba, I always, is it Toshiba? Yeah, Toshiba satellite. I always try my luck with the NVIDIA, but a lot of times it doesn't work. But with Ubuntu, it's or Linux, anything based on Ubuntu is normally okay for that. But a lot of other distros definitely struggle.
Okay, I'll post a link in the chat to the forum that had this stuff going on, and you can go through there and see everyone's workarounds on that, and maybe we can throw that in the show notes for other people to check out later.
I do want to say I've had NVIDIA issues on Windows laptops as well, so it's not a problem that's unique to Linux. I had like the issue was like with the dock station or whatever on this ZBook, it would forget screens and their orientations and where they were. Pretty much, it was kind of like, where's my screen roulette every time? And then sometimes you'd have to undock and redock so that everything would come up, because if it didn't shift to the NVIDIA GPU properly, then you actually couldn't do any CAD work on it. I don't know why, but the software really needed that GPU to do its thing. Otherwise, it would just fall on its face. So yeah, I can't say that it's not a problem unique to Linux. It's just a problem, I think, with hybrid systems. Although I will say I have a hybrid laptop that's AMD. Again, it has an Intel CPU and AMD GPU, and that's actually been basically trouble-free since I bought it in 2017, I guess now. And it's very easy to just shift the display, like I think it's called DRI Prime, I think is what it is, and then you then tell that application to use that GPU, and that actually works very well for my purposes. But I don't actually use it so much lately. It's sitting over there. It's off. But yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. NVIDIA can be problematic, but cool.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to put bad light on GeckoLinux because it's no fault of GeckoLinux. I don't think it's just NVIDIA is hit and miss in any situation. Most of the newer cards are probably okay, but this older one, if you pass the test with this older one, you're doing pretty well. But not to say that.
I was just gonna say it's also we're on Optimus laptops. We're on hybrid graphics laptops, so a lot of times my issues get resolved when I just force it to use NVIDIA across, like Nate was saying, with docking and using multiple screens. If I'm going to use this ultra wide, I have to have it on NVIDIA the whole time. I actually found out that I was having this issue because I went and hooked it up to this 4K TV behind me, and it at first it was like, oh yeah, there's a TV there. There's a 21 by 3 something display, and then I had to reboot for some reason, and I came back, and then it wouldn't see it, and then it wouldn't see any of my external displays. And sadly enough, it was a get together where I was trying to use the laptop so we could do things with my buddy's Oculus he brought over, and we didn't get to because these driver issues. But forcing it to use the NVIDIA drivers, the dedicated graphics don't have this issue on like desktops because they don't have the hybrid thing going on in the background. But luckily we have the Intel as a backdrop that it can default to. And if you ever have the issue where you get the black screen with the little cursor in the corner, but you can use your mouse, which is what most of the guys in that chat or that forum post had, just drop to a TTY, Control Alt F, pick a number, and
F2, normally,
and then log in and use the Prime select and select NVIDIA, and then reboot, and then it'll come back. It'll give you your display because it's trying to use the NVIDIA ones, but it's borked. There's no kernel modules or something there. It's not working properly, but that's a good
Right.
backup. You know, that's how I always had to do it.
Well, very cool. Thank you. So your setup, I guess, I kind of ran over a lot of things, but yeah, cool. We'll come back to you. Mark, did you get a chance to try GeckoLinux?
I did a little bit, and I just tried the Cinnamon version,
Okay.
static, and the install went just fine. I normally try to set up XRDP so I can use remote desktop from Windows to that, and I wasn't able to get that going, and so just need to probably futz with it a little bit more.
Okay.
And I should be able to get that going, but that's about as far as I got. So far, the Cinnamon desktop looks nice. The install went fine.
That's good. I think Cinnamon is a nice looking desktop. I think it was probably Eric that really sung its praises to me some years back, and so I've always had kind of a soft spot for Cinnamon as a consequence.
Of course, the update seems to be running long. Takes
Well,
a long time to update.
That's
Yeah,
RPM in my experience.
Well, I think Zipper isn't the fastest either. It's a little bit more methodical as to how it applies the updates. So there's that as well. Jinda, did you get a chance to try any flavor of GeckoLinux, and which one was it?
Okay, XFCE static. I installed it. It was like a Calamari's installer, I think. Everything went smooth. Everything I threw at it worked. It went so well. I just tried to go try openSUSE again. That's how well it went.
Oh wow!
I mean, it went really well. I didn't have any issues. I tried openSUSE again, and then I ditched openSUSE and went right back to Gecko. Sorry.
What's a better on ramp? Yeah.
Yeah. The only issues that I would say that I had with the installer was how do I say this? For a new user, like somebody coming new to Linux, there isn't much in the XFCE version. I don't know if anyone else had a lot of software installed. There isn't much there, and there really didn't look like there was much, or I missed it. There wasn't much of a welcome screen to tell you, hey, to try to help you out. But that was the only tiny complaint I have, because everything worked. Everything I installed I threw at it worked great.
That's kind of a good point. I don't know if Sam can utilize it, but the openSUSE welcome screen it has a nice little splash to get to certain things that are probably important to new users, as far as like how to install new packages and so forth. That probably would be helpful, I think, probably across all the distributions, all the spins of his. Well, that's good to know. Now, Vince, I understand you. I think you gave it a spin today. Not to dime you out. Sirvan, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, but I haven't tried.
No worries.
But I wanted to comment on one thing. I think
Sure.
the concept behind the project is really good. Like, I forgot the name of the person of the project, but he says like, I've heard the Linux user space episode on it. It's like it's very hard to trust one-man distros, but the creator of GeckoLinux is making sure that you don't need to trust them. It's like once you install this, rule is done. Like
Right.
it's your system, you do whatever you want. So that's a good. That gives me a good reason to trust that project, because it's very hard. Again, as a developer myself, it's like it takes a lot of effort to put into a Linux project, and you might never know when you have time for it, or when you might not have time for it anymore.
Right.
So yeah, that's really a good thing. I think in the beginning of the episode you talked about how Andrew Ghost went away, then EndeavorOS came into space. It's the same thing. Like most small projects, like small teams, they don't last forever. So having to do the least amount of work possible is very important for our team too, and that's a good philosophy of this project.
Yeah.
So I think that Dev mentioned that usually I wouldn't trust a one-man team who does a distro, because usually a distro does some kind of like big changes. the add packages are normally not available or something weird like that. But GeckoLinux only uses the openSUSE repos. So
Right.
you're basically just getting openSUSE but modified in the configs. So that's why you can trust them, because you're basically just trusting openSUSE.
So it's kind of like to use like a restaurant analogy. GeckoLinux is like the host or hostess that brings you to your seat. That's really all it is. The seat of openSUSE Linux. And so once the host or hostess has stepped away, that job is complete, really, for them. They might give you silverware and refill your water, but GeckoLinux doesn't even do that, really. So
we sometimes talk about it here. It's like a buzz factor, right? In many small distros, it's like one person's not working on the project anymore. It's like, okay, it's dead. We can't use it.
Right.
So that's a huge issue which we normally forget, but that's important if you want a consistent OS experience. That's important. Is that having alternatives or having systems which are not reliable on which are not relied on very small number of people actually volunteering. Like most of this work is volunteer work. Right? It's like it should not depend on few people, but in most cases it does, unfortunately, in open source.
One thing I forgot to mention, Nate, was the fact that I appreciate them having the Calamares installer, because from memory, when I've done openSUSE before, they got their own installer, right, openSUSE, and it was a little bit sort of complex, not overly complex, but a lot more complex than other installers, I believe, whereas the Calamares installer is such an easy installer to install something, so right. I appreciate that. So to get onto openSUSE in an easy way, and it gives you all that. And when I did the updates, I did see that they were installing libDVD read and all those other codecs that are needed to probably do DVD playback and all that sort of thing. So it looks like it gives you all that out of the box, which is great because that's what people need. You know, don't have to worry about all that documentation to get all that stuff up and running. Right. So I appreciate all that.
And on that point, I think like the openSUSE installer itself is for all the use cases, while the Calamares is a desktop use case. And so I think that's really when it's about that way. So I mean, if you're going to install openSUSE, for a server or some very custom installation, then it's it can be tweaked as such. So
right, so it covers all that. So the openSUSE installer covers all those scenarios, does it?
Yes. To include headless and everything else. So you can actually install. You can actually install over serial terminal, without a monitor at all, and just from another machine. You can do all these things with the openSUSE installer, which wouldn't make sense, for a desktop installation because you don't need that. But anyway. Yeah, that's what I like about GeckoLinux. It's a great on-ramp. Now, Vince, your camera's on, so I'm going to assume you're there. Did you happen to try GeckoLinux? Did you get much?
Yes,
kick the
about
tires,
5
took it
minutes
around the
before the
block?
stream started.
Perfect.
5 minutes before the stream.
And then I installed the Tumbleweed LXQT version. And yeah, I think it was Collins was saying earlier about how the ISOs are a little bit dated. I think they date back from August from the name of the ISO. The updates I ran took a while, took about half an hour or so, but I was just doing whilst the stream was running. I guess they seemed a bit slow, but I guess I'm just sort of been spoilt by Arch and how fast they are. That's one question that I have. Does Zipper have parallel downloading for packages the way that Arch does?
I don't think, at least if it does, I haven't seen it do that. There might be a way to invoke such a thing, but I don't actually know. I actually think the openSUSE project should shift over to DNF for package management, because DNF is pretty much at feature parity now with Zipper, and it's faster and does all those things and integrates with PackageKit better and all these other stuff.
I do like DNF, particularly when you can install groups of packages like it does. That's pretty cool.
And DNF is in the openSUSE repositories, So you can actually switch it over and everything will work the same, to my understanding. You just use the DNF commands as opposed to the zipper commands. But yeah, it does work the same. I don't know if OPI works exactly the same or not. Maybe, but anyway.
So what about mirrors? Does it have like Arch does? You can choose closer mirrors or anything like that, or it doesn't have that either?
The openSUSE uses, last I checked, was mirror brains, what it's called, and apparently it's mostly reliable. Apparently it's being worked on, but yeah, you can't choose the mirror. It chooses the mirror for you, the closest mirror.
Okay.
So is what it does. So it automatically does that. Yeah. So Sean, so Gecko is KubicleNate's gateway openSUSE distro. Good to know. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So once you get a sniff of that, you might be stuck, or not, or you might not like how it tastes at all. Scrap, did you get a chance to try the GeckoLinux, any of those different spins?
No, sir.
Well, you're running openSUSE, so it's kind of the same thing. You made it your way to the table yourself. You didn't get the hostess, so you get to try you didn't try the host. That's basically what it boils down to.
Yeah, I work at this restaurant. I don't actually work at that restaurant. It's just the joke. That's the joke. Full disclaimer. Don't hit me up as if I actually work on that team. No team wants me to work on that team.
No, it's all good. I think these open source projects would take anybody on their team, so long as they're not a big jerk face. I think pretty much. Even then, they might still take you. Now, Eric, you said you've tried Gecko in the past. So you're at least familiar with it, correct?
Yes. Yeah. And actually, because of the many years that I've known you and you've always had such an admiration for openSUSE and I haven't, feels like a personal failing. So I love the fact that there was a way to more quickly have a system running, because I've had some personal issues with the installer and just struggled with getting a system up and running, working with the tools, finding software, just, the time it takes me to get a Ubuntu or Ubuntu based system or an Arch based system up and running is pretty minimal at this point, after having distro hopped for so many years. Mm-hmm. But there's just something about openSUSE that it takes me forever. And then I always sort of seem to hit roadblocks, things that just make it difficult. Little things, and it's things that I always think like there must not be a lot of people using. I don't know, like it just doesn't seem like it has the same audience, because there are things I run into that I would think that if there were more people using it, that someone would have had to have run into. I don't know how to explain it. So anyway, the GeckoLinux doesn't necessarily solve those issues, but it at least gets me to a point where I have a system that is running. I appreciate the installer, and I appreciate the fact that it just runs right up into the desktop. Does openSUSE have a live version that you can?
They did, and maybe they do, but it would be buried if it is. So typically speaking, if I want a live installation or a live disk, I just use GeckoLinux. That to me is the easiest way to go about getting a live, because I can get the desktop environment I want just immediately, and you can put it on a disk and you're on a thumb drive, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah, I think that's another advantage. So yeah, there are just certain things that it makes much easier than doing it the standard openSUSE way. I think you've spent so many years using just openSUSE, and that you, I don't know how to put it. I mean, you just know what to do, because it's what Linux is to you in a lot of ways. I know you use other systems.
I do.
And things like that, but you use openSUSE for everything. So I think through the process of using it for all those things, like you've just become very comfortable with it, and just like I've done with Ubuntu and Arch, and I think, unfortunately, you would think that maybe that knowledge would transfer across all distributions, and maybe it's not been the case for me. So
Yeah, it's probably a case of taste in that regard. Quite honestly, if there are applications that I like applications are not an issue anymore because of things like Flatpak and Snaps and AppImage, that basically the application divide is like a non-issue anymore, it seems. I would say like my biggest complaint of openSUSE is the lack of integration into a nice desktop updater, essentially, is what's missing. So
yeah.
So for like Tumbleweed, you can't really do updates with PackageKit because PackageKit and Zipper they work only at the very basic level together, but as far as updates are concerned, they don't talk well, which is why I think DNF would be a better replacement, because the maintainers of DNF have done a better job of integrating with PackageKit, and so it will actually take care of all those issues as far as like if there's choosing the most correct package, like if there are changes and whatnot, that maybe one repo is advanced over the other. So, or like a version conflicts. The way DNF handles version conflicts, I think is more consumer friendly. Well, I think that the way Zipper handles conflicts is more sysadmin friendly, if that makes any sense. So
Yeah.
So I think there's that.
I think Yast, the first time I had a boxed set of SUSE like 15 years ago. And I remember seeing Yast and thinking this is the greatest thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because before I think I knew much about Linux, and I was a Windows person. So Windows, that made sense to me. Oh, here's a graphical way to do all these things. And I think in the last few years, whenever I've looked at Yast, I mean, it's still powerful and there's still a lot you can do with it, but I don't know. I feel like it certainly doesn't have the appeal that it used to. I think it makes a lot of things complicated or seem really complicated that I know are not nearly as complicated as what it seems. Yeah, there are certain things about SUSE. I just, you're right. It's taste. I don't know. It just, I feel like there's friction. I want to do this thing. I say, okay, I'm going to go find, install something or configure it, or, and I just feel like there's a lot of friction there for me to get from that point to having something run.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. That probably is just taste and experience.
Yeah, so. I think so. Cause that's basically like how I feel about Debian in general, is like, I feel like there's a lot of friction between me and the system because I know how to do it very quickly in the SUSE land as far as what the tool I would use, because it's a default tool. And that tool doesn't necessarily always exist in Debian, and vice versa. You probably expect a different tool in Debian, which doesn't exist in openSUSE because they have their own tool, or Red Hat or whatever else. But yeah, I think it's a taste thing, and at this point, basically when I set up a new system, I don't have a fancy Ansible script like Adam would have. I just have a script that I copy and paste that installs everything that I need and does all the basic configurations, which is not that much configuration-wise. It's just basically just the different applications that I want to have on that system that I'm going to be running with. Welcome, Desmond. I didn't want to...
Thank you. I think you know me as Metal Music, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, great. Another musician, or at least someone who's into music. I don't make any assumptions.
Well, don't forget I'm also Australian too, just like Vince.
Oh my goodness! So I think there might be more people from down under than any place else.
Certainly is, mate.
Well, welcome. So I hear Emmanuel. I haven't heard from you at all, Emmanuel. I'm not sure if you want to talk at all about if you've had any experience with GeckoLinux, but you're welcome to chime in at any time or listen. Just listening is cool too. So Desmond, have you tried GeckoLinux at all? Have you given it a whirl?
I may have in the past. I've tried many different distributions, so I sort of lose track a bit. At the moment, I'm running Manjaro or Manjaro, however you choose to pronounce it.
Ooh, Manjaro, I like that. That sounds fancier. I'm gonna start calling it Manjaro just because. Yeah.
And I'll probably give it another go sometime soon, because I'm still looking for the perfect distro where I can just do my music on there with no trouble. And I like Linux a lot because the latency is so much lower, and especially with Pipewire, it's so easy.
Yeah, I don't have any latency issues.
Did I hear perfect distro?
Yes,
doesn't
yes,
exist.
yes.
It's like kind of like me saying I'm gonna find my most perfect group of friends, and then once I find that perfect group of friends, it's no longer perfect because I've joined them.
Well, this group's pretty perfect, I think.
Well, we have a lot of smart people here. That's for sure. So I like this group because they teach me something every time.
I've got a question, Nate, just while we're on here. So I was just looking through the repositories or software.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to install Zoom on GeckoLinux, would that be, do you need to use Flatpak, or can you enable one of these other repositories to do that?
So there is no repository for Zoom. Actually, you might be able to.
Okay.
You might be able to. I don't know. I don't want to try and kick anything. I could try and probably kick it off here on my GeckoLinux here.
There's some Tumbleweed OSS repository and non-OSS.
So if you installed OPI, so sudo zipper install OPI,
right,
and then you just type in OPI Zoom, it'll say, do you want to install Zoom? Do you want to install Zoom from zoom.us? It'll actually find it and install it for you. So
what's OPI anyway?
OPI is kind of like I think the best way to, it'd be like using the AUR. It's not anything like the AUR, but like your interaction with it is similar to. It's like the repository where everything exists. This is basically parsing all the different repositories out there, and you can pull an application. You search for that application, and then you can pull it in, and then it'll potentially will add that repository as well automatically. It's a super, super cool tool, and I think all distributions should have this. But it allows you, like if you want to say, like for instance, if you want to install the codecs, like let's say you're not running GeckoLinux, you want to just install the codecs, you would say OPI codecs, and then it'll install all the codecs for you. Or if you say, or whatever application it is that you're thinking of, OPI, whatever that application. It'd be nice if that had like a nice little graphical front end, so you're not having to go into the terminal, like something a little bit friendlier for a user. But for someone who's okay with terminal, it's a super awesome tool. So OPI, and I think it basically parses all the open build service repositories is what that does.
Is it in IN for install, or is it
IN,
install?
or you can actually type in install. Either will work.
Right. Okay. So sudo zipper install OPI.
Correct.
Yeah. It's given me a what's it saying? The system is locked by the application with PID 6580.
So you might have that might be, check to see if you have Yast open, Yast software open.
Because Yast, okay.
Yeah, close that out and then try it again.
Cool.
It'll be all good.
Yeah, sure. All right, that's interesting to know. I'll give that a go. I knew you would know.
There's a lot of things I know only by accident. So as far as like resources to go to learn, you can go to the wiki, and I'll put the wiki in the chat. And that has pretty much, you can do a lot of searching there. It's probably just as well to use one of your search engine of your choice. I know openSUSE something, and things here are usually kept pretty much up to date. I keep the different pages I use up to date, and then I see other people are updating them as well. So it's pretty actively maintained, the wiki for openSUSE. Not to plug it, but you can go to cubelinux.com. There's a lot of openSUSE stuff there that I do. So anytime I figure something out, there's stuff there as well.
Make sure you're connected to the Wi-Fi before you try to connect to the wiki.
Yes. Unless you're plugged in. Some people call it Ethernet. Other people call it Ethernet. I don't know how it's pronounced.
Isn't that the stuff that they stick in the gasoline in your cars these days?
Yeah.
It makes you go places on that information superhighway they talk about.
Right. The more Ethernet, the faster you go. So
all these corny jokes.
Yeah. So as far as like, the underpinnings of GeckoLinux, I'm very familiar with that. So I just kind of had I was using Budgie, and I like how it looks overall, but I was a little bit disappointed at the lack of customization options as far as like making it look how I want. But outside of that, I think the user experience on there was just fine.
Budgie's supposed to be a minimalist desktop anyway.
I just wanted it all dark.
It does have. Dark.
Yeah,
okay.
I don't ask for much. I just want a dark theme. That's just all I want. Dark theme or no theme.
considerably, and I don't mind it. I like the clean look of Budgie, to be honest.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, different strokes, different folks.
Maybe they haven't adopted the GTK4 or the libid waiter thing yet. Maybe that's why the dark thing's a problem. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I'm sure there's probably a tweaks, like maybe it's based off of GNOME, is it not, Budgie?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so I think
it is.
I think maybe.
So there might be in between.
Yeah. So there's probably a tweak out there somewhere I could probably find. So Joseph says laptop runs too hot on cinnamon. Is it because there's too much cinnamon and it got a little spicy for him? I don't know. who's to tell? All right. So any other thoughts on GeckoLinux?
I have a question.
Sure. Fire away.
Because it's GeckoLinux, does it run slower when it's cold, and or does it have to warm up before it actually gets faster?
You know, that's a good question. I'm guessing it's probably slower when it's cold.
That's a terrible amphibian joke.
Yeah, I realize.
It's okay.
I don't know,
You're in the land of.
Those updates were pretty slow, and it was warmed up.
Oh, okay.
Desmond, you're in the land of bad dad jokes. So you'll fit right in, brother. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can pretty much fire away at the bad dad jokes anytime, and I absolutely will approve. You know.
All right, I hope you can handle it there.
Yeah, if someone says,
"Oh
no, a pop quiz. Oh no, is it hard? No, it's made of paper."
Oh wow.
Yeah. All right. So I guess that pretty much wraps it up for GeckoLinux. We're kind of running out of time. I want to get to Vash here. Not quite yet, but I want to get to him. So if you have any suggestions for what distributions we should explore next, send them to suggestions@linuxsaloon.com, or you can connect with me on any of like the different like social thingies. You know, there's the Mastodons, the Twitters, the I guess Facebook if you're nasty. You can do that too. I don't check it very often, but there is that out there as well. Linux Saloon. There's also Matrix, Discord, and so forth. Also the Discourse forum for Tux Digital. Check that out as well. We are going to have a application appetizer coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you have any application suggestions, feel free to send them to suggestions@linuxsaloon.com. I'm very interested in knowing what you're into in the application world, but I'd like to, spotlight an application and try it out. There's a Linux Saloon calendar, so if you want to know what's coming up in the next few weeks as far as the content of the shows and everything else, that's all out there. You can go to linuxsaloon.com, or if you can't get it there from there, you go to cubicon8.com/linuxsaloon. It's the same place. But you can check that out. Following the last show, I did a little bit of some follow-up notes on there as well. So just kind of outside of the show description for when it's published. So I do now publish just a little, call it a little blatherings about Linux Saloon on cubicon8.com. So if you want to check that out as well, it's just in a link, and then you can make comments there or so forth. But I just want to share that as well. So if you have any like notes, like Metal Music, he sent me some information regarding cooling, some very cool cooling that I thought was really interesting about basically a solid state version of a cooler that you put on, it'd be primarily probably used for mobile devices, but instead of having a fan, it uses basically like little, I guess I understood as like little hairs or whatever inside of a thing, so but there's not really moving parts necessarily, and it produces a lot more air pressure than a fan does. So very interesting. I have a little blathering about that I did on my website. I thought was rather interesting. So if you want to check that out for whatever reason, I thought it was pretty cool. That'd have been cool if you would have joined the show, Metal Music, last time and shared that sooner.
I will. I'll try to join more often in the future.
Oh, good, excellent. There was a comment in chat from Wheeland Freeman. It didn't fit at the time, and I don't know if he's still in the chat anywhere. But I did want to bring up his question. It says, "Hi everyone, I have a question about Arch, and since I know very little about Arch because it makes my head hurt, it says,
Your answer is read the man pages.
Right. It says, why doesn't it support Grub2 with Arch? Does community thinking there'll be some future support for it? I thought it supported Grub2. Does anybody know?
Yeah, I thought it did as well.
Yeah.
It'll support whatever you want it to if you know how to do it.
Just got it.
I'm pretty sure I'm using Grub.
Is it Grub or
Yeah,
Grub2? I thought it'd be Grub2.
Hey, what's the difference?
One
What's
has
the difference between Grub and Grub2?
One has a 2. The other one does not. I
I'm pretty sure every time I've used it, it's used Grub2, so that seems unusual.
So I guess maybe Waleed Freeman, maybe it does support Grub2. You know what you can do is you can go to the Tux Digital forum and you can post a question there, and you have some experts that can help you with your specific Linux questions. And, tag Linux Saloon in there, or tag Cubicle Nate, whatever, and we can follow up on that with a show as well. So be more than happy to do that.
Just to note, the Arch Wiki does have a page on Grub, and it is talking about Grub2 because it specifically notes at the top that the current Grub is also referred to as Grub2. So
okay,
there is a Grub. Yeah, so there is a Grub legacy page, but the main Grub page in Arch Wiki is Grub2.
I think they did that Grub and Grub2 thing for a while because there was sort of a mix of both, and then Grub is now legacy, so they don't say Grub2 like they used to, I think.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Waleed, I hope you got your answer. Hope that's helpful. If not, feel free to ask away again. All right. So for our community free pour, I wanted to focus in on Vashinator. So you've been doing a lot of things lately again, and I wanted to you've now kind of really upped your game again, as far as you have a website going, you've got a mailing list, and you're providing a lot of really insightful content. So I just wanted you kind of give a little sales pitch on your content, and then if you could, a link to your website as well for people.
Yeah, sure. So I have really been trying to look for opportunities for the channel now to focus more on the beginner aspects of Linux. So that's something that I'm really looking to push forward as we kind of move into this year. And so I will be starting some kind of Linux for Beginners series to just give some high level overview of what Linux even is, some common questions people might have. So that's something I'm looking at. I have another project that's kind of in the works that I think is going to be interesting, but we'll see if that one pans out. And then the website, I'm really trying to push the mailing list a bit more and kind of figure out what it's going to be. That's something that I'm really trying to build at this point. And, the channel's doing fairly well on YouTube, and I can put the link in the Zoom chat and somebody can post it in the big chat for the actual website. But yeah, I generally, most videos, I have a post to go along with them on the website because oftentimes there's commands or, script or something like that it's really not possible to easily copy from the YouTube description or a comment or something. So that's where I really started the website, is to get that information out there more easily. It's just Vashinator.com.
So I'm curious to know then, you're focusing a lot on some very interesting content. It seems things I've never heard of before, like some different note-taking apps like Obsidian, and there's another one you've been trying. I can't remember the names of them offhand. And so I'm curious to know what is do you have a list of things that you're developing out and sharing with people, or is it as you discover something you're doing a video on it?
A little bit of both. I do have some things in the can as to what I want to cover, but sometimes I'll find something and it just won't be ready, or I find something and I start playing with it and it's this is just not good at this point, in my opinion. So I don't really want to do a video about it. So, it kind of does go week to week. I'm trying to work on it to the point where I'm actually a bit ahead and to just find better stuff to look at. I know, for example, GPU screen recorder is one that I talked about last week, and I had actually saw that project relatively early, but at that point in time, I really wanted to hold back on that one, and it felt like it was finally time to bring that one forward.
Well, very cool. Well, I hope you continue to grow. I know your YouTube channel is kind of like blown up as in the last few months. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
All right, so make sure you check him out. He's on YouTube. I don't know if you're on any other video platforms, but I know you're on YouTube and you have your website. And there's probably links to your YouTube from your website, I'm guessing.
There are. And I mean, I am on Rumble, but I haven't really done a whole lot there. But my videos are being synced over.
I think what the big ones are, like video platforms, what PeerTube, besides YouTube, PeerTube, you have what BitChute is another one, I think. Rumble, Odyssey. I don't know if there are any others. Not a whole lot of Linux content outside of YouTube, it seems like. Well, I think that's about it for the night. So for it's closing time, so for last call, I should say. So I think Steve Zarione, he's not here tonight. He was in the chat for a little while. I think he's doing a coffee clash tomorrow. I think I got the notification. Correct me if I'm wrong, unless he changed it. But he does them Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Central. So if you are up at that time, it's not 9 a.m. for us Eastern folks. Check him out. He's got a nice laid-back stream. Goes over different interesting topics, and I like when he does his OBS stuff. I learned some things from him from time to time. He's talking about Peppermint 1 year later. So that'll be interesting, because I know he's been mostly on Pop! OS now. So there is, but he still keeps we still keep your thumb on the Peppermint scale there a little bit, Steve. So check that out tomorrow, 8 a.m. Central, 9 a.m.
I believe that he's doing streaming from his phone. I think it was.
Oh, that's right. On Wednesdays, he's doing he's doing like an impromptu stream from, from I don't know, Chicago somewhere, I guess. That's why Steve's
somewhere in Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago's very own, Steve's very own. Mark, you have the Atlanta Linux Enthusiast Group, and you meet every Sunday, 3 p.m., right? That's Eastern.
That's right. Every Sunday, 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern. We meet for 3 hours, and it's really it's free form, and we're mainly helping folks with their questions. Sometimes we'll do demos and something Linux or open source, but primarily we're there to help you, with questions and answers and work through problems. Recently, a couple of folks had Wi-Fi issues with a newer laptop, and we helped them through that. Wi-Fi drivers are released with kernels, and the gentleman was able to get his laptop up on a newer kernel, and the Wi-Fi started working. So
nice.
It was good to actually have him get that Linux going on his son's laptop, and I'm sure they'll be happy with that. So join us. We're online. You can find us at ale.org, and we meet every Sunday, and just show up, and it's very casual, and ask some questions.
It's nice because they're using Jitsi, which has gotten quite easy to use, actually, which is nice. And it's a large group of people, and most people are just listening, but there's a large group of people that with a wide variety of knowledge. And the part that I saw was just different people as there were different, questions coming up, like, that person would answer, and then this person would answer. And yeah, it's a good time to just kind of, if you're hanging out anyway, like, just join, and there's no expectation that you're doing anything except just kind of hanging out. So
yeah, it's definitely a good group of people. A lot of very knowledgeable people, like a treasure trove of all kinds of historical Linux and Unix knowledge. So I forget who it was that I was talking to, but it seemed like he was in the Unix business since there was Unix. So
yeah,
Destination Linux I believe it's streaming live tomorrow. I'll have to check on that one, because I think usually it streams live at 1 p.m. Eastern. So if it's not streaming live tomorrow, then I'm wrong. Linux User Space, next episode is dropping on Monday, and it's chock full of all kinds of browser stuff, and they're still experimenting with CentOS. So you can check that out Monday, Linux User Space. Linux Out Loud is a podcast I'm a part of. I have 2 co-hosts. One of them is absolutely fantastic. Her name's Wendy, and then I have Matt. We talked about open source projects rising from the ashes. And also, we're going to do a live recording on 17th of February at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to join us while we do a live recording, it's kind of a 1-year anniversary of us being Linux Out Loud, transitioning to a slightly different format. So you can check that out in a couple weeks now. 17th of February, 2023. What am I saying, 2022? 2023 at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. I have a website called CubeLinux.com. I've plugged it a few times. I've written a few things this week. A really neat feature that I had to re-find about spell check in KDE Plasma. So if you misspell a file name, you can actually have it give you the little squiggles underneath. So how to utilize that. Did an article on the JSOC screen protector for the Steam Deck, and something that's not Linux related at all, although open source and tech related, a modern RAM replacement for the Commodore 64. They actually use modern chips to replace the old 8 array of 8 chips in there. So I thought it was a very interesting project, and it's amazing people are keeping such old hardware alive after 40 years. You'd think that would have given up by now, right? So Linux Saloon is part of the Tux Digital Network. Check out more great shows at tuxdigital.com. I want to thank you all for your support, whether that's being part of the conversation in both YouTube meeting or the Zoom stream, as well as everyone for watching the show after the fact. I want to thank everyone involved in making the Linux and open source tools possible for us to not only have this conversation, but also to have fun and enjoy our technology. Linux truly puts personal back into personal computer. Thank you for stopping by. Be sure to tip your developers, and please remember to Linux responsibly. Until next time, see yas.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye.
Yeah.
You know,
Goodbye.
See ya.
you're muted, Eric.
Sorry.
It's all right.
You may. I thought that's how people liked me. Optimal power management.
Oh, I think I lost you. Your sound.
Management with TLP pre-installed, much configured repository. Uses the excellent. Oh, my back. I'm
Yep.
sorry. My Zoom is cutting out. So
Oh,
am I better?
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. Well, you know, Zoom
Okay.
is one of those
Sorry.
things. It's all right. Not your fault.
It's just kind of rubber banding on me. So
Yeah.
to me, if someone were to say, I want to try
Oh.
openSUSE, and I mean, this is. I think I froze up again.
Yeah, you did.
Never mind.
From
We heard
I'm
try
just
and
gonna
that was
stop
it.
because my Zoom's messed up.
yeah, I think you were gonna say something about if someone wants to try openSUSE, this is probably a good way to go with it. It's probably what I think you were going to say. So.
Yeah.
I
Well, I
think,
mean, and yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I did. Excuse me, just a minute.
it's all good. I caught you off guard. It's my fault.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought you were. It's not the same what?
No, I was finished pretty much. Yeah.
If he's there. Uh-oh. Maybe he's not. Maybe he'll be back. We'll come back to Vince. Adam, I'm not sure if you had a chance to try any GeckoLinux or not, but I thought I'd ask.
3 weeks later.
Maybe he's busy. Also, I'm I'm two for something.
Everybody's MIA, Nate.
They're tired of hearing me. Gabriel, not sure if you tried any GeckoLinux at all. It's okay if you haven't.
1 eternity later.
So like when I distill down these episodes, all the little things like this, I just kick it off to the end as part of the bloopers, so the show flows. Put a little bleep in between. It's fun. It's a en.opensuse.org/main page. It's their or just en. So, but outside
Well,
of
I've used
maybe-
Budgie. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
but
no,
I've used
No, that's all
Budgie.
right.
oh, and I forgot a couple of the notes in the housekeeping. So
It's just Vashinator.com.
awesome.
You're
So
mute.
did yeah, I know I was muted. Thanks. I had this
Party's over.
sinking feeling that I forgot to start recording, like just as I was saying that. I did
Oh.
remember to start to record, so we're fine.